speaking about React, which is a JavaScript framework developed by Facebook. You can use React together with Immutable.js, Service Worker, and other JavaScript frameworks. That's because React is so vast in technical opportunities, so you can use it for other frameworks as well as just React in itself. And that's kind of a good thing about React. It's kind of like the V in the MVC. So if you want to use React together with other frameworks, that's very easy. I'm going to tell you the presentation now, and we can take Q&A at the end if that's OK. Yes? Great. At my spare time, I tend to piece off famous game developers, ask Google developers for like silly questions that I don't know myself. I'm asking or ranting about stuff at the Facebook, and usually I get those kinds of responses. Also, I'm currently going to help Chromium develop their site or redesign their site, chromium.org, so that's kind of fun. Also, let's move on. So, React, fast by default. What do I mean by that? It allows server-side rendering, but also the primary goal of React is to do client-side rendering, which primarily means that the server or your client doesn't render like all together, but the client and the server is currently like, well, I can explain later, but to get to the point, it's client-side rendering, which means that your React app is going to render super fast. So not only that, it allows you to cache your data, which means that if you cache your data, that allows the websites to run even faster, and that's the best part. If you want to cache your data, you probably should use Service Worker because that's the best framework out there. It's kind of not a framework, but kind of like a Chrome extension itself. So to the next bullet point, it allows hot reloading, which means that you can debug your code or make changes to your code in real time. I'm not going to show you that in this presentation or in my text example, but if you want to know about it, just ask me later. Also, React gives the possibility for DOM hacks, which I also show you later. It's called virtual DOM, which primarily just is a copy or a duplicate of the actual DOM. So move on. It's simple. Just hold on. These notes are so bad. Simple by default. It allows you to do code splitting, which basically is to split up a code in different modules. It's easier for designers to integrate their designs. So if you have a designer can easily program. And that's like kind of like the bread and butter React. Like programmers and developers, they work hand in hand instead of working each and themselves. I'm going to show you a feature later that's called JSX, which means that it's primarily just JS, and the JS is kind of embedded in HTML. And again, the HTML is kind of like effed up, but I don't know if I can say that, but I'll show you later what that means. So by default, it means that you can express your UI very easily. The MVC. React is the V in MVC. It controls your view, which basically means that you can do whatever you want in your view. It's so vast, and it gives you so much possibilities, so you basically can make an app out of that V. Components. React is built up of components, which is a efficient way of defining your UI. Not only that, but components are kind of like the code splitting part where you can bundle up all your code and just make one component out of it, although that's called a container, which most of you probably have heard of. I'll show you an example of what a container is later. It's kind of like just all these small duplicates of lesser or smaller components that's kind of like just grouped up and just sent to the DOM. Also, components allows cohesive programming. That allows us, as said earlier, to nest our components. It allows one-way data binding, which is kind of like a great thing about React. It doesn't rely on two-way data binding, which Angular bases their design on. which also means that your development is going to be much, much better than Angular developers. Sorry. I'm just going to take some water. Hold on. So, wow, that came up twice. Regular JS. This is a React component made out of regular JS. So what this is, you can see here that we are creating. First, we are creating an object, which is a React class. The way we do that is by calling the method create class, and we give it the object property of avatar, and then we render it. Always remember to render your components. React isn't valid if you don't render it. So basically what that means is like whenever you're defining a React component, you have to render it, because else you get like a nice error message that's kind of like 40 lines down. So with regular JS, it kind of just makes a div and sets the nesting property to 0, and then it creates the element itself, which is page pick. That's kind of like an own React component, which I'll tell you later. And it sets these properties to it. This props does page name. The way you can invoke properties is by doing this. You can either do this or to set states through functions, which I'll also cover later. So, introducing JSX. What is JSX? Well, here's a new example of JSX with React. This is like the bread and butter with React, because it simplifies your components and your programming flow much more or much better than it did with regular JS. You could use regular JS. There's none stopping of that, but all developers doing React prefer JSX because it's so vast and it simplifies everything. So first, we are creating an avatar and assign it to the React.create class method. We render the function, which means that we are going to render it as a React component. We give it a return, and then we set the div and closes the div, of course. And we set our components, the page pick component, to be page name. Page name is kind of like this, which tells us what page name it is. So I'll show what I mean by my counter app that I'm doing at the end, how you can use prop and how you can invoke those props. But basically, what it does is like it takes a React component and you can modify it everywhere in your code. It's so good. So I kind of like gave an impression of how a React component was built up. So now I'm going to tell you more about multiple components. Multiple components basically means that you can first tell a React component to render, and then you open the component, kind of like a div or another tag, and then you put all your components that you have made earlier in that div or like in that component. React doesn't allow you to to make all those multiple components in a very like a different way. You have to like put it in a div, and that's it. You can also use a span or another grouping element, but you have to use a grouping element to render multiple components. You can also, if you have multiple components within one component, you can also allow filtering and mapping through a set of objects through a ES6 syntax, which basically maps all your components and then just groups them together. I don't know, it's something wrong with my... did I show you this? No? Well, here's the page pick. Here's the render function, and like you have your string here. That's okay for React. You can just render a string, because this is rendered as a HTML tag. So it's completely fine to just have a string here, but you have to make sure you have them with clams. Otherwise, it won't render, because React components, they are recognized by the clams. So always remember your clams. After that, we set this to this.props.pagename. The page name, actually, we're going to set once we have rendered it. So the page name, that will come when we are rendering to the DOM, which I'll talk a bit about later. One-way data flow. One-way data flow is kind of like how you would expect React to work with the DOM and the virtual DOM. It allows you to express your components that render super fast. So there's not much to talk about there. I'll show an example later. Showing all later. Basically, you have to show like live examples to kind of get you on the level that you can understand what I'm talking about here. It's kind of abstract in the start, but once you have worked with React, kind of like maybe 2 to 3 sessions, you kind of like get a grip of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about one-way data flow and rendering to the components and such. I'll just try to explain this as simple as possible to kind of like get you to understand what I'm talking about when I'm coding live later. The virtual DOM. The virtual DOM is kind of like just, as I mentioned earlier, a duplicate of the DOM. It allows React to render a function, and then it takes the React component and differentiates between what's rendered and what's in the DOM previously. So that kind of like is like, okay, we have this div element. It wasn't implemented in my code earlier, and now it's going to implement. So it takes a different algorithm, and then it differentiates it with the actual DOM, and it computes the difference, and then it inserts it. And that's what this graph is about. It takes the component you're making, it flows through React, which the React algorithm helps us with. It mounts the React component to the DOM element, and then you can view your app. Remember always to have a div or a tag at your code, because React won't render if you don't have a div or a single tag. It always have to have a tag that you render it to. Sorry. So here we have the virtual DOM. If you want to render a function or I mean a component that's like here, this could easily be just been a h1 tag. You don't want to have two-way data binding, which means that you have to like, oh shit, we have to render the whole tree again. React computes this, so you just have to swap these spots. This means that your app is going to render much faster than it did previously, which it has significant performance improvabilities on your app. I promise that. So once it has done that, it renders the change to the DOM tree, which basically means that you won't need a hard refresh to refresh your React app. It does that in the background, so you won't actually notice the app itself is rendering. You would just like have a small tap at your browser up in the upper corner, telling Chrome to like having this small refresh. Component lifecycle. I'll show you this later. It's basically functions that tells how React components is behaving. So you can modify React at each, the React component at each stages. This means that we can make apps that are expressive, but we can also make apps that's kind of like what you would expect the model to be. Let's see. This get default props, that's a function which you can easily just invoke through calling the function and set parameters inside the function. That's for all of this function. So first you can set default props. That could be like the h1 tag. The property of that could be like hello. And then we get the initial state. So if hello is valid, we can set initial state to be true. If that's not valid, we'll set hello to world. I probably should use the foobar example there, but never mind. We can also modify when React is mounting on the DOM. So we can always keep track of states and props, which is kind of like the bread and butter here. Although once you get better at doing React components and making stuff in React, you will notice that this is kind of like a messy way to express states. So if you are decent or fluent in React, you probably should check out Redux, which is a library made by Dan Abramow. He works at Facebook at present times and at the React team. The library itself is made out of dispatchers and actions, which means that you can modify the states and have predictable states at each set of times. That's kind of like the bread and butter of the Redux. It allows us to keep track of the states whenever we are. So, what makes React great? I can tell you that it makes complex apps simple. It's well documented. It allows us to make fast client-side rendering. It's easy for designers to integrate the designs. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a designer on the team, just like if you're making an app with React, you can just like grab him in, give him an introduction to React, and he's set to go. And that's if I were an employee at that company, I would like beg to work on React because that's great. It allows code splitting, and as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of like just a summary. You can bundle up your code in different files, and this makes your app cohesient, which means one-way data binding. I'll show an example of that. It's great to speed up development. So if you're planning to swap to React from another library, I definitely recommend it, even though it's kind of like hard to swap it between Angular and React because the fundamentals of Angular and React are not the same. So if you're planning to use React, go with React. It's a great library. Also, React scales great. React is used by Netflix, Airbnb, Instagram, of course Facebook, they're the one invented it, and many other companies. VG is currently using React. I can show you that later if I have time. VG keeps track of the time on the what's hot or what's important timeline. React keeps the state of the time there. React gives us an expressive V. So before I go into the live examples, I want to talk about React Native. React Native is kind of like React, but it allows you to make apps with JavaScript, as well as other functions and other features React Native has. It kind of is a twist of React, just because you're developing for mobile and native environments instead of like web page desktops, apps as itself. So there's some differences with React Native. You can check that out yourself. I'm not here to speak about React Native, but React in particular. So this is an example app that could be made with React. It's made by Gobi, which is a Norwegian-based company. They're up in San Francisco now. Check them out. Publish something on the gathering side. They have an own group there. So yeah, let's go to the example. Just hold on. Let's see. I have to find my. There we go. So I've set up my own environment here. It's basically Node PM and NPM, Node Package Manager, Node.js. It's React, of course, and it's Webpack. If you want to learn setting up this environment, I recommend you not to use boilerplates, because boilerplates are just to get you set. You can maybe notice that I'm using a boilerplate here. I made that myself, so it's perfectly legal. Also, every open source project out there is MIT based, so that's a good thing. So let's kickstart this. First, I want to import the React library from npm to allow us to use React code. I've also set the file name to be JSX, which is just to get those nice colors from Adam. So let's start. I'm using ESX syntax here, but you can easily use var. I'm setting var counter, which is our counter app. I'm setting it to be React.create class. Wow. There we go. I'm going to set the initial state. Sorry, I'm going to simplify this. Initial state is a function, and it should return us the counts. Of course, we are counting this. We're going to set this.props.initial count, which means that in our render method, we're going to set it to have always the track of the count here. So just going to close this for security reasons. So we want something to handle our clicks. So we can also use custom methods. I'm going to use something called handle click method. I mean function, sorry. It's so hard to code on external screens. I'm setting this.setStates to the counts. So what we are doing here is we're setting the state. What state is the app? Well, it's count. So this is done through an object set property. I'm going to set this to this.state and what the count is. So what we are doing here is we are refreshing count to be what count is now. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to set it 1 because we are clicking it once. So that's kind of a neat way to set the count. Also, for just to show what this would look like in the console, I'm just going to log it. Not string there, but this.set states.count. Not see out. Just gonna simplify this. So, well, we can do this to the end, but now we're gonna need our render function. So I'm gonna call the render function, and I'm gonna return a div, because we're always gonna need to mount it on a div. Although I have a div, this basically means that we are creating an extra div upon that div we are creating. So the only thing React needs you to do is actually create a div in your index.html or your sample file. Also, this works like if you're now going to render at the dat tag, it's gonna render an extra div and an extra h1. I bet you knew that already by now, but that's what it does. Also, I'm setting onClick, which is kind of like a function that we all know, or well, onClick just set the click to handle something or to do something once a user has clicked something. So we're gonna set this dot handle click, and we don't need to do anything anymore. I'm just gonna close this. We can do an extension later. I'm gonna just show you live examples by setting CSS styles within React, but we could save that for later. So what I'm gonna do now is close my React class, and I'm gonna export a default counter. This is default exporting it as a module, so we can include it in app.jsx. Hold on. Here we go. So what we need now is to first import React, of course. We also need to import the React DOM. These two are like, I'm gonna type this first. These are NPM packages. So it imports the npm packages and mounts React to your code. If you're not using npm, I think it's available with other node-based systems, but if you want to start with React without setting this eco environment, you can easily just do that by going to Facebook's homepages with like React homepage, and they allow you to like start hack straight away from their website. So that's a neat way to start programming in React. Now we want to include our module in our code. It's called counter, so we have to import counter from something. So I'm just going to import this is basically just setting where it's going to search for the counter file or the hello world file, and it's going to go one directory up. So that's what the .slash does. And I'm going to just set it to hello world components. We don't actually need an JSX extension here because I've set it already in my config file. This is kind of like just to show you what I'm doing here, but I'm setting JSX to resolve itself in my Webpack config file. So as I said earlier, if you want to learn Webpack, just hit me up later. So once we have done that, we can start mounting our component to the DOM. Or the React DOM, of course. So what we're going to do now is calling React DOM.render, which calls a render method on React DOM or the virtual DOM. And we're going to set this as a component. And we're going to set our component prop types, or what we have defined here. I can show you. You notice that we set the initial count in the first initial state. So what we are doing now is we're going to set the initial count, and this is easily done just by doing something such as initial count, and we're just going to set it to like 7. Always include the curly brackets, because if you're not doing this, React won't render. It would render, but it won't render the actual React DOM component. Either that, or you get an error message. That's not what we are going to do. React is a React component, so you have to differentiate this between a React component and a DOM component. So what you're doing now is you're just going to do this. Without using an extra tag, you can define a React component. So when you're defining a React component, you would not use a new tag and having a closing tag, I mean a backslash before the actual name. You just use this. And now we're going to express where we're going to set it. So I have this index.html here. I've set up an easy, like this is my boilerplate setup, but here's my div, the example div. So I'm going to set the example div to be I can either set it to the example div or I can set it to the content. As long as React renders it to an actual tag that's in your HTML file, that's okay. So I'm just going to set it to, wow. Now I'm going to set it to a node. So what I'm doing here is now setting it to a node by the getElementById. And the ID of the div I'm setting it to was content. I'm not going to use the example node now. I'm just going to show you an error message later. So that's basically it. So now I have to boot up React with npm and all that kind of stuff. So I could use Command T, I mean space, but I'm lazy. In a good way. So now I'm going to just find my project structure. Yeah, so here we have it. What we're going to do now is I have already set up my eco environment. So if you're doing this by JSLint, for example, you don't need this. But I'm just going to show you. I have predefined npm commands here, so it's nothing hack about that. I'm just setting the build to make Webpack module everything and build it all together. Also, I'm having like this extra parameter here, which basically means that I'm setting error messages. So if I have the errors, I will get that in detail, and it's gonna make a source map. You can see that here. I've already built that, but. So that's it. A Webpack rendered or bundled everything perfectly. So now I'm gonna just open the file. I could have used a hot reloading server or a dev server here, but I'm just gonna make it or open it from the file or the source file. So well, I got it up. Yeah. So I've rendered it to show an error here. Just hold on. Chrome. So we did something bad. That's like the way of telling me I'm a bad developer, but let's see what we did wrong here. Hmm? Jeg glemte det. Ok, skal vi se. Det var sikkert her det da. Hvor var det så? Åja, herregud. Takk. Sånn. Atom. So hopefully it would render fine now. That's weird. I'm just gonna open. Sorry guys, I'm kind of like a noob at this. I haven't used plain old React create class components for a long time now. If you can spot the error, that's great. What? Well, so hopefully it would render now. Oh, wow. Well, we haven't forgot to build it. No, I hadn't. Sweet. So we're gonna do it my way. Just copy paste from another file, so I don't have to like embarrass myself forever. So what I wanted to show you is that you can use CSS with React. So you can just like set a style and assign it to an object property. And I haven't like taken the opportunity here to make them one, but what you basically do here is you have a ternary operator, which means that you are setting this .state count, and if like you're defining if set state and count is 10, you set these styles to be that, or else it's going to be that. So Hopefully it would render now. Wow. Well, that's our app, just JSX maybe then. Hmm? Du må snakke, jeg hører ikke. Å ja. Herregud. Debug-dag i dag. Så So like it's not rendering, but if you want to see the example later, I'm gonna show you that. I don't know what's wrong with the code, but yeah, I'll figure it out. So thank you for the embarrassment. If you have questions, just take them now. Hopefully you don't have questions about the code I did wrong, but other stuff about React, so just speak up if you want. I don't think it uses pad string library. React just uses like they have built up the code base of their own, so they're just using Webpack, I think, for their extension, and